If I can just introduce Heléna Herklots, CBE. She's the Older People's Commissioner for Wales is an independent statutory role established in law to protect and promote older people's rights. But she's going to be telling us about all this, so I won't go on about it. But she has a background working with older people and families in day centres and care homes. She's influenced public policy, campaigned for change, and developed and provided support to older people. So without further ado, may I welcome you, Heléna, and ask you to start your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Lovely to see you all and to join you in U3a week. So it's a real pleasure to join you all. In a moment, I'm going to ask Harriet to share some slides with you. And it's going to be a little bit like those TV briefings from Downing Street back in the day where it used to be next slide, please. Do you remember that? About 2 or 3 years ago. So it's going to be a bit like that. I'm going to be asking Harriet to go through the slides for me. But before we do that, I just thought I'd give you a little bit of introduction to me and to the role, and then I'll sort of take you through it in a bit more detail. So I've been the Older People's Commissioner for Wales since 2018. And in fact, I'm in my last year of serving as Commissioner. So we serve a particular term of office. And it's a real honour and a privilege to have this role, which, as Janet said, at the heart, it's about protecting and promoting the rights of older people. So what I'm going to do for you today is I'm going to explain a little bit more about the role and the functions and the legal powers that I have. And then I'm going to talk through the priorities that I'm working on and touch on some of the impact and the changes and developments that I've been able to secure in this role. I work with a team of people. So when I'm talking about what I'm doing, I'm also talking about all the efforts of my colleagues in my team. And we provide a direct advice and assistance service to older people. So older people are able to contact me directly. And I have expertise in my team where we can provide advice and assistance, whether that's issues around health or care or housing, for example. And another part of my work is being out and about and meeting older people throughout Wales and listening to the issues and concerns that people have, but also the ideas and the contributions that people are making, the ideas for change. So there isn't really a typical week for me, but generally it'll be a little bit of engaging with older people, working with public bodies, with Welsh Government, trying to secure improvements for older people, and engaging in events like this as well. And as Janet said, there's campaigns underway in England and Scotland to have an Older People's Commissioner there, and I'm really pleased that that campaign is underway. At the moment, there are only 3 Older People's Commissioners in the world. So Wales was the first to create the role. I'm now the 3rd Commissioner. Northern Ireland has a Commissioner for Older People, and the only other country that has a Commissioner for Older People is Malta. So kind of an interesting group of 3 countries that have gone down that road. And really it started here because of campaigning by older people and older people's organisations for an independent role that would be an advocate and someone to champion older people's rights. So with that as a little bit of background, I'm going to ask Harriet to go on to the presentation now and start sharing the screen. So if we go on to the first slide. Thanks, Harriet. So this is the legislation that set out the role. So this was back in 2006, and this was part really of the devolution journey for Wales, and Wales having powers now to make its own decisions in more areas of policy, although it was still reliant on the Westminster government to pass the legislation. So this is the act that set up the role of the Older People's Commissioner. So it is a statutory role, and my role and functions are set out in law. If we go on to the next slide, please, Harriet. And there are 4 functions that I have, and these are on the face of the Act. So the first of those is to promote the awareness of the interest of older people in Wales and of the need to safeguard those interests. to promote the provision of opportunities for and the elimination of discrimination against older people in Wales. So that, of course, covers age discrimination, but it covers any type of discrimination, so racial discrimination, sex discrimination, for example. The third function is to encourage best practice in the treatment of older people in Wales, and that's much broader than health treatment. It means treatment by any public body. And fourthly, to keep under review the adequacy and effectiveness of the law affecting the interests of older people in Wales. So I have an ongoing scrutiny role. And when it talks about older people, in the Act, it defines older people as everyone over the age of 60. So the next slide, please, Harriet. This is a summary of the key legal powers that I have as Commissioner. So first of all, a power to review the way in which public bodies discharge or don't discharge their functions. So that might include, for example, health boards, local government, housing departments. So my role, my legal powers extend over public bodies, and I've got the power to review what they are doing or not doing for older people. I can also review advocacy, whistleblowing or complaints arrangements that public bodies have. And then I can directly assist an older person in making a complaint or representing to a public body. So I mentioned I have an advice and assistance service, so we're able to directly assist individual older people. I'm able to look at the case of an individual older person that in a matter that affects the interest of a wider group of older people. In other words, if there's an issue that someone is bringing to me and I think this has wider implications, or I feel that older people more generally would benefit from a formal examination, I can do that. And then finally, I can issue guidance on best practice to public bodies, which they have to give due regard to. And I will give an example of that in a little while. So as Commissioner, I'm able to set my own priorities. So when I came into post and throughout my work as Commissioner, I continue to engage with older people and consult on priorities. And the next slide, Harriet, please, will show the 4 key priorities that I have as Commissioner, and I will be talking through with you today. So to protect and promote older people's rights, to stop the abuse of older people, working to end ageism and age discrimination, which I know is something that you very much are working on as well, and enabling everyone to age well. In other words, enabling people in terms of adding life to years and not just years to life. And I'm going to talk through these priorities, but I also just wanted to say something about my role during the pandemic as well, because that was a time of huge challenge for all of us, and a lot of older people and their families and friends experiencing great distress, great hardship, loss and grief because of everything that was happening, and a particular role for me and my team during the pandemic in terms of working to uphold people's rights and to give voice to what older people were experiencing and to try and change what government was doing, what public bodies were doing during that time. So I'm going to talk a little bit more now, particularly about my role in terms of protecting older people's rights, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples of these. So Harriet, if we go on to the next slide. So I want to talk particularly about the rights of older people living in care homes. And this report and all these documents are available on our website was something I produced early in the pandemic. And this was to, as the name suggests, to give voice really to older people living in care homes, people working in care homes and their families and friends. And it was published in the summer of 2020 when care homes were in lockdown, where people couldn't visit. And I was particularly concerned that in all the discussion and debate that was happening about care homes, the people we were hearing least from were actually those living in care homes, their families and friends, and those working in care homes. So did a snapshot of people's experiences, and I did some video calls into care homes to talk directly to all the people living there, did a survey to get people's views, and set out really people's experiences and a number of calls on Welsh Government. And one of those was to have an action plan for care homes during the pandemic, and a number of measures that I felt needed to be taken to better protect older people, and also to enable people to stay in touch with their loved ones. And I'm pleased to say that eventually the Welsh Government did produce an action plan, and a number of the recommendations that I've made from that report were taken forward. And the next slide just gives an indication really of how I'm continuing to take that work forward now. So again, during the pandemic, a couple of years ago now, I then brought together experts and organisations across the UK to work together to look at how we could improve and strengthen the rights of older people living in care homes. And we produced a guide to living in a care home in Wales, but working collectively with people across the UK to look at how we can strengthen older people's rights, improve the access to healthcare in care homes, improve people's security in care homes. And that guide has gone to every care home in Wales. So I've written jointly with the Chief Inspector of Care Inspectorate Wales, the regulator here. And really what I'm aiming to do in this piece of work is to improve people's understanding of the rights that people have within care homes and to enable people to uphold those rights. And the next slide, please, Harriet, goes on to another issue which has been one which older people have been contacting me a lot about, and I've heard a lot about, which is about digital inclusion, but also digital exclusion. So the way in which so much of our lives now is reliant on us having digital access. I mentioned earlier that one of the legal powers I have is to issue guidance that public bodies must give due regard to. So a couple of years ago, I issued guidance to local authorities and health boards in Wales called Ensuring Access to Information and Services in a Digital Age. And that sets out what action should be taken, in my view, by local authorities and health boards to make sure that if people are not online, they are still able to access the information and services that they need, as well as encouraging those public bodies to support people to get online with confidence and to sustain that. And in Wales and across the UK, around 32% of people over the age of 75 do not use the internet. In Wales, that's equivalent to about 100,000, just under 100,000 older people. So huge numbers of people who are unable to use the internet. And as our world increasingly moves online, a danger that they experience social exclusion. So as well as the guidance, which all health boards and local authorities had to then kind of report back to me on, issued information to older people about their rights under the Equality Act and Human Rights Act. And the next slide just indicates the responses that I then received from those health boards and local authorities. Now, since doing this work just 2 years ago, I think things have got even more difficult actually for people who are not online. So I'm now carrying out further work. I've gone back to those health boards and local authorities, and I'm currently asking older people to get in touch with me about their experiences so that I can take further action if I need to with public bodies to make sure that older people aren't being excluded. So there's just a couple of examples of using my powers in relation to guidance, in relation to holding public bodies to account and promoting older people's rights. I'm also working on a number of issues that were raised during the pandemic on rights. And those include issues around do not attempt CPR, DNA CPR, where you might recall there are quite a lot of issues around the communication and process of that. So I'm working on that. Working on issues related to older people in hospital when they're waiting to be discharged, looking to make sure that it's much clearer about what rights people have and what should be happening. And also carried out work specifically with Black, Asian, minority ethnic older people to better understand their experiences so that I can better act on those as well. So we'll go back now to the next slide, if we may, Harriet, which as a reminder of the priorities, I'm going to talk a little bit now about stopping the abuse of older people. So if we could get on to the next slide as well. So during the pandemic in particular, I was worried that because of lockdown and because of the restrictions, more older people might be at risk of abuse. And when I'm talking about abuse, I'm talking about every type of abuse. So that might be financial abuse and scams, it might be domestic violence or sexual violence or coercive control, for example. So this is where I've used the ability, in a sense, of a commissioner to bring organisations together. And I've set up an action group of about 30 organisations, primarily across Wales. And together we are working on stopping the abuse of older people, and by carrying out those 3 areas I've indicated there. So increasing public awareness, improving support and services, improving the research and data, making sure that the voices of older people are heard, improving training and support, and changing policy and legislation where we need to. And as part of that, I've been using my ability to carry out research to support that work. So if you could go on to the next slide, I've done a particular piece of work, for example, on making improvements for older men who experience domestic abuse. So a lot of my work has been really working on abuse as it affects older women, but actually the risk of experiencing domestic abuse as a man increases as you get older. But it's an issue that is rarely talked about. There's very little research done on it, very little evidence. So I was very keen to start finding out more about what older men were experiencing and therefore how we could improve the responses. So commissioned this piece of work, which I'm really pleased to say is leading to changes in the way in which older men are being included in policy and strategy, and increasingly, hopefully, in services too. And then the next slide just shows an outcome of one of the pieces of research I commissioned on the support and services available. So we've produced information for older people in leaflets, but we've also got a facility on our website to search for support and services. And one of the things I was very keen to see was much more focus on older people experiencing abuse in the policy and work in Wales. And I'm very pleased to say that one of the things I've been able to secure is the first ever national action plan to prevent the abuse of older people. So working with Welsh Government, who are now finalising that plan, which will be out shortly, and it's the first of its kind in the UK. So a specific plan designed to prevent the abuse of older people. And I'll be continuing to work constructively with Welsh Government and other organisations on that implementation. But I think for too long, the issue of abuse of older people has been in the shadows. People haven't felt able to come forward, haven't known where to go, and we absolutely have to change that. We've got a long way to go, but I'm pleased with the way in which lots of organisations with older people are working together to make that change. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to now talk a little bit more about ageism. And if we go on to the next slide, and another click. So this is probably an image that you're all familiar with. That image of a pair of hands, which look like hands of an older woman. And how many times, if we're reading an article in the newspaper or seeing some coverage about older people, do we see that image? This is a stock image that's used by lots and lots of different media outlets. And there are a number of things about this. One is that in order to illustrate older people, there is just this one image that's used. It's an image, I think, that's quite dehumanizing in a way, because there is no face there. It is just a pair of hands, as if that pair of hands indicates everything that there is about growing older. So if we go on to the next slide, please, Harriet, we'll see some of the ways in which the media use these ageist stereotypes. And here's some examples from the press. So the Telegraph in 2022, 6 reasons why boomers have it better than millennials. So press often very fond of creating these sort of groupings. Elderly and overweight are the real COVID super spreaders. The new anti-aging, how the pandemic unlocked new ways to lower your biological age. So these stereotypes about us as we get older, which is often referring to us in just one way, so one image or one way of describing us, but often very, very negative. I commissioned Leicester University to do some work looking at the way in which we're described as we get older in the press, and mostly it's negative. Mostly it's describing older people in a negative way or growing older as a period of decline, rarely talking about the contribution that we continue to make as we get older. And because the media is so powerful, it helps to feed attitudes and negative attitudes towards growing older that lead to that ageism. The World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 2 people hold ageist views against older people. So this is how people think and feel and act towards us as we get older. And this is really damaging. There is evidence to show it affects our health, it affects our access to services, it affects our employment prospects. And I actually think ageism is at the heart of some of the challenges and difficulties we face as we get older. It is not growing older that necessarily brings these, it is the ageism and age discrimination that exists. So as Commissioner, I'm really keen to really work to tackle what I think is the root cause of a number of other problems. And one of the pieces of work I've done is to try and start to improve the way that the media covers ageing and older age. So I worked with the charity, the Centre for Ageing Better, on media guidelines for reporting on ageing and older age, which the National Union of Journalists have been very positive about. And we're still trying to persuade the Independent Press Standards Organisation to do more on this, although they have now included these guidelines in their good practice. And the next slide just gives a bit of a snapshot on one of the guides that I produced for older people, so enabling people to take action directly themselves. And over my term as Commissioner, at various points we've been offering training to older people and professionals about what ageism is and how to combat it and how to challenge it. So this is always at the heart of my role, challenging ageism and age discrimination. It's a huge issue to tackle, but part of what I'm doing is also scrutinising the work of public bodies and Welsh Government on the issue of ageism and age discrimination and taking action on individual issues as they arise, really. And then the next slide. So the final sort of broad priority I have is about enabling everyone to age well. And as part of this, I've been encouraging local authorities, working with older people and partners, to develop as age-friendly communities. In other words, to look at how the barriers that sometimes get in the way of us aging well can be removed, and at a local level, practical improvements can be made. And the World Health Organization identifies 8 features of age-friendly communities known as the 8 domains. So I'm just going to touch on 2 or 3 of these things. So the work I've done with local authorities is really to encourage them to review what they're doing, engage with older people and commit to being age-friendly. And I'm pleased that in the last 18 months or 2 years, 4 local authorities in Wales have now joined the global network of age-friendly cities and communities, really committing to doing further work, and a number of other local authorities are in that process. And the Welsh Government, I'm pleased to say, has also committed to this in its ageing strategy, which is called an age-friendly Wales. So there's now a developing movement in Wales to be an age-friendly nation, to enable us all to age well. And within these areas, some of the work I've been doing over the years, I'll give an indication on transport. So back in 2019, the Welsh Government made a decision to increase the age at which you can get your concessionary bus pass. At the time it was 60, and they decided to increase it to state pension age. And I had a number of concerns about this. One of the concerns I had was about the process on which they'd made this decision, and their impact assessment, which I didn't feel had properly looked at the consequences of doing this and the costs actually of doing this. They'd only looked at the costs of having the concessionary bus pass. And I was also concerned about the impact that this would impact on people who, for example, had had to leave work in their 60s to care for a loved one, and so were on very low incomes and relied on this concessionary bus pass. People who were in their 60s who were possibly not able to work or were finding it difficult to work because of health conditions, and decided to really challenge Welsh Government and to put the arguments for why that decision should be reversed. And I'm pleased to say that the decision was reversed by Welsh Government, and our concessionary bus pass in Wales, you're still eligible for age 60. And the reversal of that decision immediately meant that about 300,000 older people would benefit as a result. And given the cost of living crisis now, and given the pressures that many people are experiencing, I'm relieved really that we still have that concessionary bus pass in place at the age of 60. Community support and health service is a key area. I mentioned earlier that I'm doing work at the moment, particularly looking at the issue of older people in hospital and what should be happening on discharge in terms of care that should be there and the decision making that should be happening. And I'm also about to launch a specific piece of work looking at how access to GPs can be improved, and wanted to hear directly from older people on their experiences. And as I do that work, I will then make some decisions about whether I need to take further action on that issue. On outdoor spaces and buildings, key issue that older people raise with me is access to public toilets. So recently did some work on that, and are now looking to see how we can improve access to public toilets or publicly available toilets in Wales as well. And I'm also doing some work under the employment strand on older workers and how to improve prospects for people who are in work as they age, as well as for people who might have left work but actually want to go back into work in older age as well. So I hope that's given you a flavour of some of those other things that I'm working on. And the last slide, please, Harriet. So all of this is encapsulated in this statement, if you like, that I'm working with my team for Wales, where older people are valued, rights are upheld, and no one is left behind. So this is about valuing us all as we age, combating ageism and age discrimination, trying to make sure that older people are still able to feel they are valued and contribute and are listened to do more to make sure that people are aware of their rights, their legal rights, their human rights as we get older, and to uphold those, and to make sure in this challenging and fast-moving world that no one is left behind. So particularly those who are experiencing poverty or digital exclusion, I want people to know that if I am their champion, and me and my team are here to champion for them and to take their issues forward as is needed. And then the very final slide just gives some contact details. So if you want advice and assistance, if you live in Wales, or you maybe have a friend or family in Wales and you're concerned about them, that's our telephone number. And then you've got our various Twitter and website details as well. So let me say thank you, Diolch yn fawr, and I'm very happy to take any questions now. And thank you, Harriet, for doing the slides.
Thank you very much, Heléna. That's really impressive what you're managing to achieve already in Wales. I mean, getting the bus passes back for 60-year-olds, because presumably there's quite a budgetary, money needs to be found. So I can really appreciate that was quite a big task. We've had a few questions, but I'm sure more of you have questions to ask. If you go to the chat box on the bottom line, it's quite easy to pop your questions in there, and please do so. But if we start with some of the ones we've had already, the first one was how, why are we calling people old at 60? when the retirement age is 66?
So, as I said, I set out my role at that time to find older people at age 60. And as you imagine, when there was the consultation about setting up a commissioner and the law was being developed, there was a lot of discussion about what age it should be. And I think it was partly in recognition that our experience of aging varies dramatically. And for some people who may have had particularly difficult lives, at the age of 60, they might be experiencing very difficult health conditions, they may be living in poverty, and there was a need to be represented at that age as well. So it does mean that as Commissioner, I have a very wide span, because some of the issues I'm dealing with are people in employment who might be facing ageism or age discrimination. I'm also helping people in their 60s who may be caring for older parents in their 80s and 90s. So going through the experience of caring as well. So it's in the legislation. So that's why it's what, if you like, I'm here to represent. And as long as it's in the legislation, it will stay at 60. I'm happy with it because actually, whatever age you set that at, the key thing is to remember that we are all individual, and in fact, we probably get even more different as we get older. So as long as we remember that the huge diversity and don't make assumptions, then as Commissioner, I've been happy to work with that broad age range. I mean, it does present some challenges just in the sheer range of issues and that I need to focus on, and that's why the process of priority setting with older people is really important, because I can't do everything, and if I spread myself too thin, then I'm not going to be much use. So it's been important to be able to set priorities with older people.
Well, I can well imagine that, because there's such a wide range of issues, and in general, do you get a fairly receptive? Are you having to really battle to get some of your issues onto the agenda, or are you finding that people are generally receptive to?
Well, I think I mean, before this role, I spent most of my life working in the sort of charity and voluntary sector, and that was a much harder to kind of get heard. I think the role and the position of the Commissioner means there are more open doors. So the role of the Commissioner in Wales is a very public one. It's one that Welsh Government treats seriously, and that's important. So in terms of the campaigns running in England and Scotland, I think it's really important that you have a government that really wants to have a Commissioner and treats that role seriously. So most of the time, I would say there is good engagement. Of course, it doesn't mean we agree on everything. And in fact, if we did, I probably wouldn't be doing my job right. So part of my job is to take what I'm hearing from older people and to talk directly to ministers in Wales about that. So sometimes people are very receptive, and sometimes it's just hard work to make the case, because maybe it hasn't been an issue that's been high on the agenda. And I think abuse of older people was a little bit like that early on. We're past that now. We're making, I think, good strides in recognition and understanding. And sometimes it's not that people are deliberately putting up barriers, it's that they just don't know what's happening or don't understand the impact of something. And therefore, it's my job to make sure they do. So I've certainly found it to be, on the whole, constructive. And that's also about taking my approach to this in the right way as well. So where I can be constructive and work in partnership with Welsh Government or public bodies, I will. Where I need to be critical, where I need to hold them to account, if I need to do that publicly, then I will as well. And it's about having that mix and having that balance, I think.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And with elder abuse, are you already seeing some changes?
Yes. So mentions that we've had commitment from Welsh Government to have the first ever national action plan to prevent the abuse of older people, and that will be the first in the UK, and that will include some concrete actions on making improvements in terms of awareness and services. What I'm pleased about is I'm seeing some of those changes come into what services are provided now as well. So that's the thing, isn't it? You can influence the policy and the strategy, but what are you experiencing?
Yeah.
And that takes longer. But I'm now seeing organisations do that. I've visited organisations who are doing great work supporting, for example, older people who've been victims of sexual violence or domestic violence. And I've, as a personal priority, taken time to meet with older people who are survivors of abuse to hear directly what it's been like for them trying to get the right help, what needs to change. So it felt like we had a mountain to climb. If I could use an analogy, we're beyond base camp. We're climbing that mountain, but we still have a way to go, and we need to keep at it. But I've been really heartened by the way in which so many organisations have come together and said, well, let's do this. We can do this. We can make a difference. And it will take time. And of course, we're working in an environment where money is tight. But I've been really humbled, really, by the way in which so many people have been taking positive action on this.
Well, that's fantastic. And one of the questions was from Carolyn, interested in how you would quantify the impact of your role in Wales since your appointment. I mean, you've said quite a bit about that, but is there anything you want to add?
Yes, well, when I started and sort of set up my strategy, I set out the kind of areas that I wanted to influence, and produced a couple of State of the Nation reports where I've kind of looked at the data and the evidence and the statistics that are around on some of those key areas. However, what I found was that quite often the data isn't there, so the data isn't always collected. Mm-hmm. And actually, that can render older people's experiences invisible. Because if the data isn't there, it's much harder to make the argument, or it's much harder to say, actually, older people are missing out. So part of what I've also been working on is to improve the data, and particularly to make sure that in data that's collected about the public, that it's broken down by age so we can really see the impact. So just to give you an example, coming back to the issue of abuse, up until last year, the England and Wales Crime Survey did not ask people over the age of 70 whether they'd experienced abuse. So they were simply not collecting the data. So we didn't know, how many people were experiencing it. But equally, it meant that people weren't being asked the question, and their experiences being rendered invisible. So part of what I've been doing is also to seek to challenge the data collection. So in terms of impact, I've given some concrete examples. So getting that reversal of the decision on the bus pass, for example, improving support and policy on abuse, helping individual older people. But the scrutiny role is also important, and some of this is not always seen. So some of it is stopping things happening. So maybe there was going to be some decisions that I felt were going against the interest of older people. So sometimes it's kind of doing that work behind the scenes. I think one of the things I've learned from being commissioner, though, is also the power of the role in and of itself. And I remember when I started the job and I was going around and meeting older people, and older people saying to me, "Oh, you're our commissioner." And I feel that very strongly. So I'm here, and my team is here solely to, if you like, to serve older people in Wales. And I think that's a powerful connection, actually. And it does mean that for individual older people and their families, I'm able to make things happen that otherwise wouldn't have happened. So we're also having that day-to-day impact on individual older people's lives. We're having that impact on Welsh Government policy and strategy. So it's strategy for an ageing society. It's committed to an age-friendly Wales because of the work of me and my team. It's committed to that work on abuse. It's committed to doing work on ageism. So you can absolutely see how the government agenda has changed because of the work I'm able to do and the way in which we're able to enable older people's voices to be heard.
Thanks. And Jill says, considering the population of 60 plus in Wales and Malta and so on, do you feel that one commissioner for England would be sufficient as the population of 60 plus? It would be much higher.
I think it's a really interesting question, because the way in which I do my role in Wales would be very different from someone doing it in England. I mean, I'm able to, I have 22 local authorities in Wales to connect with. In England, there's, I don't know, 150, 160. I'm able to travel to different parts of Wales to meet all the people directly. And obviously England, just on scale, is very different. So I think it's just about looking at the structures, really, and thinking about the size of the team that the commissioner would need and the way in which they would engage directly. So it would need probably to be a little bit differently structured. It would certainly need more resource. But I think the essence of it is independence, legal powers, engaging with older people. That's really the essence. And I think that absolutely you can replicate.
And will you be on the subject of that? Will you be able to demonstrate some of the economic benefits that having a commissioner brings in terms of increased engagement of older people in the economy and so on and so forth? Because imagining in Britain, if we, trying to say we need more resources spent on this with the budgetary pressures now, we're going to have to go in there, aren't we, with some evidence that of benefits that will come.
Yeah, I suppose I'd put that two ways, really. So one is to say that, and I'll come on to the economic benefits, but one is also, and I think it's important in terms of the campaigning, is to be very clear that the reason that an older people's commissioner is needed is because older people's rights are not being upheld.
Yeah.
Older people are not getting the treatment that they should, and that is not acceptable. So, I would say to colleagues in England, don't lose that campaigning zeal for why a commissioner is important. Just setting aside the cost for a moment, it's because older people are not getting the treatment that they should do. And there needs to be an independent champion who can hold government to account, who can work closely with older people.
Yeah.
In terms of the economic benefits, interestingly, when I was sort of challenging the bus pass decision, one of the points I made was that in their impact assessment, they just looked at the cost of keeping the bus pass. They hadn't looked at the benefits of older people being able to get out and about and use public transport, and the benefits of the health service by keeping.
Yeah.
So that's certainly an example. In some of the work I've been doing on the take up of pension credit in Wales, for example, that's bringing in money into Wales from the UK Treasury. So that's actually bringing a direct economic impact. And the whole Aging Well movement is all about prevention, all about enabling us to stay well. So I guess it's part and parcel of an approach which we have to take as a nation. We have to do more about how we age well, and u3a is a shining light in that in many ways. And we have to change the narrative as well, which too often sees the fact that we're living longer as a negative thing. So I think there are some economic arguments that you can make. I would just always lead with the argument of principle and the argument of the need.
Well, and so you've partly answered the next question, which was as we mentioned earlier, the recent survey of u3a membership says 86% of people think it's a good idea to have a commissioner for older people in England. And contrary to the myth that older people are a burden on society, our members are particularly aware of the great contribution that older people make to society through their skills, knowledge and experience. Do you think there's a role for the Commissioner to help create and achieve more opportunities for people to share their skills, knowledge and experience?
I do. And I hope I've done that in my work. So we've done some work where actually we're able to give an economic figure for the contribution that older people make in Wales through volunteering, through caring, through childcare and things. We tend to use that quite a lot, just to say, hang on a minute, actually, this is billions of pounds that older people are contributing to the Welsh economy. So don't just kind of portray older people as a burden. So that's important. I've been keen to promote greater intergenerational contact as well. So within the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, we supported the setting up of a cross-party group on intergenerational solidarity, so working to bring generations together. And again, really demonstrating how important older people are within communities, within families, and the contribution that people make. And I think we just need to keep at that, actually, particularly when the media in particular actually sometimes want to just talk about the pensions triple lock and talk about the cost of an older population, as if And this comes to sort of othering, a very kind of ageist approach, kind of othering, older people as them.
Yeah.
As we're not growing older and it's never going to be, us. So it's important, I think, to try and challenge that. And yes, to talk about contributions. So when we're doing our communications work or when we have conferences or events, I'm always keen that we have older people talking at those directly. So it's not just me. And in our reports, I always want to make sure that it's older people's voices and experiences that shine through those as well. So the way in which I try to work in Wales is in partnership with older people. Obviously, I have a specific role in that, but I couldn't do my job without listening to older people's ideas or being challenged or being supported. It's very much a partnership.
Yeah. Thank you. And then we just got a few more questions that we'll take quite quickly because we're coming close to the end of our time. A couple of the whole digital thing. One is, what influence have you been able to leverage with the banks, given the greater need of the old generation where digital services are not relevant? And I'll take the other one at the same time as that, which is, can you say more about keeping people who are not online informed by public bodies? So we take the two digital ones together.
Yes. As Commissioner, I have my legal powers extend over public bodies, but not private bodies. So I don't have any legal powers over banks. That might be a good thing, I don't know. But what I can do is advocate for older people and also work with Welsh Government to highlight the issues that older people are experiencing so that in the work that they're doing with banks, they can take that forward. But there is a limit to what I'm able to do with some of those private companies, sadly. But in highlighting digital exclusion, I do hope that has a kind of a wider impact. The work I've done in relation to people who are not online really came out of some contact I had with a professor of law in Bangor University who was talking to me about people's human rights under the Human Rights Act, and particularly freedom of expression, which extends not just to what you yourself communicate, but the right to be communicated with. So with her expert help, we looked at the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act, really establishing what rights people have to be able to access information and services in the way that suits us, and use that in this formal guidance to say to public bodies, you need to make sure that if someone is not online, they're able to access information and services, and they shouldn't be disadvantaged by that. So providing that very clear guidance and then holding them to account on that. So then they're reported to me on what they're doing. And then what I'm doing now is this work to really hear directly from older people, their experiences. So if I see, for example, that maybe a health board or a local authority has done something which entails someone being online to access it, then I challenge that. So part of my role is to then challenge and hold to account to make sure that actually older people are not disadvantaged. And that, I think, over the coming months, I'll probably be doing a fair bit of that because so much is going online. And sometimes, again, it's just that people don't always understand how many people aren't online. And actually, I'd just say one more thing about that. It's not just about whether you're online or offline. It's about being confident and feeling secure and safe in the online world as well. So although, and I gave the figure, about 32% of people over the age of 75 don't have access to the internet here in Wales, but a much greater number aren't confident in using it. And of course, it's not just about having the internet now. If you haven't got a smartphone, you're excluded from a lot of things, aren't you? Because you often need that when you're out and about, whether it's parking your car or downloading some information from a QR code. So we have a lot more to do here. And I've been working with colleagues across the UK on this issue as well. I know Age UK are going to be doing further work on this. But I'm worried about this area. It's as I said, it's not just about being digitally excluded now, it's about being socially excluded from many areas of life. So it's definitely one to keep fighting on.
Well, thank you. And well, more power to your elbow. I mean, the huge problems that people with power of attorney and so on have in administering things on behalf of other people. Just one example. Right, we're nearly out of time. Stephen asks, is promoting an active lifestyle for older people, exercise, continued learning, healthy eating, etc., part of your role?
So I do some of that. At the moment, actually, Open University are running a campaign during September called Take 5 to Age Well, which I've been supporting. And in my priority of enabling everyone to age well, then I will seek to amplify what other organisations are doing. So earlier, I can't do everything, nor should I try to, but what I can do is help people who are doing great work or doing good things or have important messages. I can help to amplify that and get that out through my work and through my networks. And I'm particularly keen and that more is done, more investment is made on enabling us to age well and to age healthily. And that includes the way in which I can kind of support or promote work that other organisations are doing.
Yes, and we've had a question about in accessing services, do you think there's an extra problem when people have hearing loss? So many people think that as long as we have hearing aids, everything returns to normal, which isn't so, and telephones can be very stressful.
So I think there are problems with access, yes, with hearing loss, but also for people maybe whose first language isn't English.
Mm-hmm.
Wales, we have issues where sometimes people struggle to access services in the Welsh language, for example. So the issue of access to services is one, I do focus quite a lot on that, but we do need to keep that focus, because I think sometimes assumptions are made that it's just easy, to use an online system or to use a telephone system, and it's not always thinking about the disabilities that one might have or the difficulties that one might have. So certainly some of the issues that older people raise with me are about those issues of access, maybe because of hearing loss, or maybe because of some cognitive impairment as well that is making life difficult.
Well, Heléna, we've had a lot of comments in the chat box about how people have found, refreshing to hear such positive news, excellent presentation. Really hope England appoints such an excellent candidate. Thank you for a super presentation. Any chance we can clone you for the rest of the UK? So I think we've really been inspired, and we'll just have to keep the battle on and hope we can do the same for the rest of the UK. So thank you very much indeed, Heléna, and more power to your elbow with all the many challenges you face. It sounds a fascinating but very full-on job. Thank you. And before you all go, sorry.
No, I was going to say thank you, and just to say a big thank you to you, and congratulations on u3a week and all you are doing. So I hope you continue to thrive. It's a fantastic organisation, and I've been delighted to be part of it today. So thank you.
Thank you very much.